My name is Dominic Rivera, and I'm going to do my project on Maurice White, who is most well known for his role as the leader of the band Earth, Wind & Fire, which is one of the most popular groups of the 1970s and early 80s. I'm going to be talking a little bit about his childhood in Memphis and also his early career in Chicago, which sort of led to the creation of the band Earth, Wind & Fire, and also the importance of the sound that he created with that band. So as I mentioned, he was born in Memphis, Tennessee, raised by his grandma after his mom left at a very young age. Due to the racially separated culture that existed in Memphis, she was forced to move to Chicago to find work. She was even quoted saying that you could only find work in Memphis if you were scrubbing white people's floors, because that's kind of how it was at the time there. Maurice and his grandma lived below the train tracks with a lot of other black people in majority low-income housing, and above the train tracks were majority affluent white people. There were only 8 black police officers on the Memphis police force, and they weren't allowed to arrest white people. And in fact, Maurice was once beaten by police when he was delivering newspapers as a young boy. He was also a mixed child, which meant he faced a lot of discrimination from both whites and blacks. So his skin was not dark enough to be black, not white enough to be white. So this is really like a volatile environment for him to be raised in, and sort of a scary place to be for a young black man. And he sort of found comfort and refuge in the church, which him and his grandma attended bi-weekly. And this is sort of where his musical journey began. He took influence from the choir and really paid attention to the classical hymns that everybody knew by heart already. And he became immensely fascinated with it and sort of just started practicing music on his own time, and specifically took interest in the drums after seeing the Bugle Corps march through his town one day, which he actually ended up joining. And that was sort of the spark to his musical journey. And when he was 12, he created a small quartet with 3 other friends, and they began playing pretty consistently at the church. And this was sort of what allowed them to hone their skills and throughout middle school. And eventually, by the time he was in high school, he was already one of the most talented musicians in the area. And he began forming groups with other people, such as Booker T. Jones, who actually went on to be famous under the name Booker T and the MGs. And the groups he played, they would play big dance shows, talent shows, house shows, anything that they could really get their hands on. And so this was a really good experience for Maurice in terms of, developing that early skill musically. And as soon as he was becoming comfortable with his life in Memphis, his grandma fell ill, and his mom came from Chicago to see him for the first time in years. She insisted that he come back to Chicago with her, since Memphis didn't have very many opportunities for him as a young black man. And he didn't really have very many options, so he decided to go with his mom, leaving his good friend Booker and his grandma behind. It was a tough decision, but it ended up changing his life and actually ended up sparking the musical journey that we all know and love. So when he first got to Chicago, he was enamored by how large everything was and how much busier everything seemed. He saw black and white men walking amongst each other in the street, seemingly as equals, something he had never seen in Memphis. He also saw many well-educated, middle-upper-class black men around town, which was very inspiring for him, since there wasn't a lot of that. It was a lot of blue-collar workers in Memphis. And he was also introduced to his father, which was not his biological father, though he still called him dad. But he was inspired by him because he was a podiatrist, really well-educated man, who knew how to take care of himself and his family and was respected in the community. So it was because of this, it was sort of his first role figure that he had in his life. He decided to apply to Crane Junior College and pursue medicine. And I thought it was really interesting because this is something I discovered in his book, and I hadn't really noticed online before, but I had no idea it was his initial goal to be in the medicine field. So yeah, but it was actually there where he met musicians that inspired him to focus more time on music. Some of the musicians he met there ended up being a part of Earth, Wind & Fire many years later. But he bought a drum set and started relentlessly practicing, attending jazz clubs around town, and sort of, soaking in as much information as he could. And people started to slowly notice his drumming abilities at the clubs and such. And he finally got a gig at VJ Records, which is one of the first independent labels that was black owned. And he began doing studio sessions for artists on their catalog. One of those was Betty Everett, and Maurice played drums for the song You're No Good, which was a national hit reaching top 50 on the Billboard Hot 100. This was a big moment in his career, and after spending more time with VJ, he eventually got a gig as a part of the Chess Records house band, which was a very big label at the time, and he earned a reputation as one of the best drummers in all of Chicago. And Ramsey Lewis, who was the leader of the Ramsey Lewis Trio, which was an extremely popular jazz pop trio at the time, it was one of the most popular groups in the world. He would sit in on his sessions, and one day he came in and offered him the position of drummer in the trio, and he of course accepted. And it was really his official introduction into the music industry and sort of the touring realm of everything. And he really began to tour the world, like toured Europe and went to China and different parts of the United States. And during this time, he really focused on himself spiritually and started reading a lot about the cultures that he was visiting and reading a lot about Buddhism and its connections with Christianity. And so he was really starting to formulate this sense of what he wanted to do in the future with music. And also, this is at the time when he was in the States. He was surrounded by the countercultures of the 1960s. This was the turning time of JFK assassination, protests against Vietnam, the civil rights movement, led by Dr. Martin Luther King, who he actually met once. And this was really the transition from the Jim Crow era into the 70s, the decade of integration and equal opportunity. And it wasn't only a cultural change, but a musical one too. And when stuff like James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud started coming out, Maurice started really to realize that the transition in music was taking place, and it was to more of Black freedom and Black expression. Because before, in the 50s, it was clean cut suits, you had to be presentable, but artists like Sly and James Brown really allowed that sort of Black expression and redefined like Black masculinity. And he credits Sly and the Family Stone for inspiring him to create Earth, Wind, and Fire. With all this change in culture and music, he really was looking for a new way to express his own creative ideas. So he decided to leave the Ramsey Lewis Trio, which was something a lot of people were questioned heavily, because it was a consistent gig for a musician, which wasn't really common at the time. But he had big plans for a group that would provide a sense of encouragement and peace to its listeners. He wanted a band that would represent universal truths and uplift humanity. Of course, many called him crazy, but he was eventually able to create a group of guys that followed him to LA to pursue his dream. For a while they struggled, but he eventually hired a manager, and they began to play gigs around town and eventually got signed on to Warner Brothers. And they signed them on for 2 albums, and they recorded their first 2 albums, 1970 album Earth, Wind, and Fire and the 1971 album The Need of Love. They were mildly successful, but it wasn't necessarily what Maurice had envisioned. They sort of signed him on more as a jazz act. So he was, looking to further his career with someone else. So he was brought on by Columbia Records, and that's when their music really began to blow up, and that's when he was really able to sort of depict what he really wanted to get out of this music. And that was the album Head to the Sky, was their first big album, and it achieved gold status, and which was followed by Open Our Eyes, which was another big success. And so this music finally started reaching the charts, and it's clear that he successfully created the sound that he was after, which was sort of a sound that was going to undeniably make people dance, undeniably make people groove, and that sort of brought people together. And I think it's really inspiring that he went through all this turmoil as a kid growing up, receiving all this hate from other people, yet he still wanted to create something that was like boundaryless, just everybody can enjoy. And I think it's clear that he was able to successfully do that. And their live performances were also something that he really was adamant on being extravagant and sort of showcasing their music. And sometimes they even threw in magic illusions. Earth, Wind, and Fire's message was one of universal harmony in both musical and cultural senses. We live in a negative society, Maurice told Newsweek. Most people can't see beauty and love. I see music as our medicine. And I thought that was a good quote to sort of end things off. And just, mention the fact that he had such a big goal, and that was to create music that would uplift humanity. But in reality, the music he created was almost simple in a way. It was just a way for people to connect and unify. And it may sound crazy, but he was actually able to do it. And I think that's great. Thank you.